midnight screams.
Midnight. The community speaker suddenly blared to life. Today, anyone who speaks more than 50 words will die. The speaker repeated that rule over and over. My upstairs neighbor, furious, flung open his window and screamed wildly. But just as he hit his 50th word, he fell abruptly silent. An instant later, his entire body plummeted from the 6th floor. When it happened, I was standing at my own window, cheering him on. I watched, frozen, as he slammed into the ground. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The grotesque scene stunned the entire complex into silence. A dead quiet fell over everything. Oh God, I was about to scream when a large hand clamped hard over my mouth. I turned to see Mason, my roommate. He held a finger to his lips, typing furiously on his phone with his other hand. If I remember right, between your complaining and your cheering just now, you've already said 47 words. And the speaker's rule for today is that anyone who says more than 50 words will die. Reading that, a chill shot through me. My scalp went numb. Damn it. My roommate furrowed his brow and pressed his hand tighter over my mouth. That was 49. The situation was both urgent and bizarre. We rushed to open the door and wake May, our other roommate. She woke up mumbling something, wasting 3 words. We quickly silenced her and explained everything. Once we'd calmed down, the 3 of us gathered in the living room, typing on our phones to communicate. We tried to message the residents' group chat, but found the network was completely down. We couldn't get any information. We had no choice but to go outside together. No matter what, we had to get out of this cursed complex. What we found was even more hopeless. The oversized iron gate and the towering walls were shrouded in a pitch-black fog. It was so thick we couldn't see the road beyond. Hanging from the main gate was a blood-soaked corpse in a security guard's uniform, his flesh charred black as coal. Next to his body stood a wooden sign that had never been there before. Leaving the community is forbidden. None of us doubted the rule. The guard's fate was all the proof we needed. We could only lock ourselves in our apartment, lost. At noon, the community speaker finally came on again. Attention! The community rules will now be introduced. Every resident must memorize them carefully. 1. A new rule will be announced via the speaker every day at midnight. Please adhere to it strictly. 2. Whenever a new rule is issued, the previous day's rule will be automatically voided. 3. The rules will not be repeated. 4. The perimeter has been fitted with a high-voltage electric fence. Leaving the community is strictly forbidden. 5. The community rules will be in effect for 10 days. After 10 days, all rules will end. Only the survivors may leave safely. After hearing the rules, I couldn't help but type on my phone. In other words, we have to stay in this hellhole for a full 10 days? Mason nodded. That's right. And we have to survive 10 different rules. 1 mistake, and you die. This is far too dangerous. May scratched her head. If we can't leave, isn't food going to be a huge problem? At that, I shot up to check the fridge. Thankfully, it was well stocked, and we had plenty of rice and noodles. At least the 3 of us wouldn't starve. Mason shook his head. There are a lot of families in this complex. Plenty of young people are used to ordering takeout. As time goes on, people will run out of food. In a few days, some might do insane things for a meal. Reading his words, it dawned on me. So we have to be absolutely quiet. Don't let anyone know we have enough food stockpiled. And we have to keep the doors and windows locked tight. We spent the next day in suffocating silence. Especially me. I had exactly one word left. If I dared open my mouth, I would die on the spot. The midnight bell echoed through the complex. After a low crackle of static, the rule for the second day was finally announced. Community Rule 2. Anyone who sleeps for more than 3 hours will die. As soon as the rule was fully announced, I started cursing up a storm. The old rule was void, after all. But before I could get more than a few words out, a new announcement came from the speaker. Attention. The initial population of the community was 600. After today's rule, the number of survivors is 531. In just one day, 69 people in the complex had died. I wondered, out of 600 people, how many would walk out of here alive? To deal with the second day's rule, May quickly drew up a schedule. We're all exhausted right now. Getting rest is crucial. To be safe, I suggest we divide our sleep time rationally. I looked at the schedule. Each person's sleep was broken into 5 half-hour blocks, spread out across the early morning, afternoon, evening, and late night. The last half hour was a buffer, just in case. Our rest times were staggered, so we could watch over each other and wake the next person up. Staring into the thick darkness outside the window, I couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion. I wondered how many more would die today, May quickly typed. Definitely more than yesterday. This rule looks simple, but it's incredibly dangerous. The need for sleep is a biological instinct. The more tired and stressed you are, the harder it is to resist. After yesterday's ordeal, most residents are already at their breaking point. The young people who live alone here can only rely on their willpower to hold on. For the entire next day, we stuck rigidly to May's schedule, taking turns. And all day, from different corners of the complex, hundreds of piercing screams echoed one after another. They must have come from those who had broken the rule. It was hard to imagine what kind of horrific death they suffered. In a state of tension and anxiety, we pushed through 24 hours and finally made it to the third midnight chime. The familiar static of the speaker crackled, and the new rule followed. Community Rule 3. Today, anyone who sees the sunlight will die. Attention. After 2 days of rules, the number of survivors in the community is 397. The focus of the third day was sunlight. This rule finally had nothing to do with sleep or rest. As long as we sealed the doors and windows, we should be fine. It seemed simple enough. We sprang into action, using black duct tape to seal every window. Everything was covered. Once we were sure not a single crack of light could get through, we collapsed into sleep. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. I don't know how long I slept before the crushing fatigue let me go. My ears were filled with the sound of frantic knocking. Where was it coming from? I rubbed my throbbing temples. A glance at the clock showed it was 1:30 the afternoon. With all light blocked, the room was pitch black. I slipped on my shoes and started searching for the source of the strange knocking. I finally traced it to the hallway outside our front door. There were chaotic footsteps, like ghosts running wild in the corridor, constantly knocking on doors, kicking them, even using their fingernails to produce a high-pitched scraping sound. I wanted to look through the peephole to see what was happening, but it was completely covered. I couldn't see a thing outside. Suddenly, an icy chill ran down my spine. I hurried to wake my still sleeping roommates. We were all silent for a long time before anyone could speak. This community rule is just too vicious. Only then did we realize that the third day's rule, which had seemed the simplest, was actually the most dangerous, vicious. The first day's rule bound the residents' communication, bringing infinite anxiety and fear that was impossible to vent. The second day's rule restricted their sleep, making it even harder for their already strained minds to relax. Fatigue slowly turned to torment. The third day's rule took away even the sunlight, forcing everyone into a darkness that stripped away their senses. Step by step, the atmosphere in the community grew suffocating, numb, even insane. Combined with the deadly impact of food shortages, many people would break. They might even commit terrifying acts just to survive. The rules were cruel and insidious. Everyone could only struggle to stay alive, including the three of us who didn't know if we could last 10 days. Those frantic residents in the hallway were just poor souls, tormented by the rules. We had no desire to sleep anymore. We listened as the wretched screams grew louder with time. The sounds of smashing and ramming against doors were constant. Even our door was attacked several times, but thankfully, we had managed to barricade it in time. When the midnight bell rang, I knew we had successfully survived the third day. Community Rule 4. After 1 a.m. today, anyone who sees their own reflection will die. Attention. After the third day of rules, the number of survivors in the community is 299. The number of people who fell on the third day was even higher than we'd imagined. The complex had lost half its residents. Thankfully, the fourth day's rule wasn't too difficult. You could call it an upgraded version of Rule 3. We had to cover anything that could cast a reflection. Everything had to be covered, including mirrors, glass, and other reflective metal surfaces. With our experience from the third day, this wasn't too complicated. The large glass windows were already sealed, so we didn't have to worry about them. We just needed to deal with the various reflective objects inside. The TV screen, the refrigerator surface, pots and pans, and even electronics like phones and computers. After we finished, the entire apartment sank into a complete silence. The three of us spoke less and less. Though this rule wasn't deadly on its face, the mental torture it inflicted was continuous and escalating. I felt deeply as if I'd lost my soul, utterly numb. This numbness lasted for 24 hours, until the midnight bell rang again. Community Rule 5. During the day, you must climb at least 20,000 stairs. Violators will perish. Attention! After the fourth day of rules, the number of survivors in the community is 262. Luckily, the fourth rule only claimed 37 people. Those who had survived for 3 days usually had a certain capacity for survival and had accumulated experience in dealing with the rules. Despite the anxiety, they weren't likely to fall at such hurdles. Thus, the survival rate was higher. Forget this fifth rule. At least I'm finally not trapped in that suffocating darkness anymore. Let's go out and see what's going on. We can get some fresh air while going up and down the stairs. May peeled the seal off her phone. We can use the step counter function on our phones as a reference to complete the requirement. But the moment we opened the door, a foul, rotten stench hit us in the face. A wave of nausea flooded my brain. I quickly covered my mouth and looked closer, only to find the hallway scattered with the corpses of residents. Thinking back on the piercing screams we heard every day, I suspected this was the result of breaking the rules. Death had never left. It was always right beside us. 5001, 5002, 5003, 6025, 6026, 6027. Without realizing it, we had been climbing in the stinking hallway until dawn. With mutual encouragement, the atmosphere wasn't as oppressive as we'd imagined. But I had to admit, we had initially underestimated the difficulty of this rule. As someone who spent the whole day cooped up at home with a perennially low step count, I hadn't exercised this much in a long time. I was exhausted after only 6,000 stairs. Normally, walking 6,000 steps is tiring enough. Now, it was stairs. We had no choice but to return to our room to rest temporarily. We woke up at noon, had a simple meal, and started a new round of climbing. After daybreak, many of the surviving residents came out of their rooms and joined the stair-climbing army. With more people, the tension eased a little, and the physical exertion seemed to lessen. But for us, 20,000 stairs was still a mountain that was hard to conquer. It wasn't until 10 p.m. that the step count on my phone finally ticked over to 21,000. To avoid the data being skewed by any flat ground walking, Mason suggested we do another 1,000 stairs just to be safe. Mission complete. I finally let out a sigh of relief and collapsed to the ground. It was grueling, but we had narrowly survived. Among the three of us, May was in the best shape. She had finished her 20,000 stairs by 8 o'clock. Mason struggled the most, finally finishing just after 11. It was a close call. Before we could rest for long, the midnight bell rang right on time. Even before the speaker announced the rule, waves of wretched screams erupted. It seemed many people in the complex who had mobility issues or were out of shape couldn't survive this rule. I swallowed hard a few times, finally waiting for that familiar voice from the speaker. Community Rule 6. At 12 p.m. today, please proceed to the rooftop of your building. You may not leave until after 12:10 p.m. Violators will die. Attention. After the 5th day of rules, the number of survivors in the community is 215. After hearing the rule, I was stunned. What does that mean? Why is this so different from the previous ones? Just spending 10 minutes on the rooftop? Compared to not talking all day, not sleeping, and climbing 20,000 stairs, this is child's play. But the simpler it seemed, the more worried I became. 5 days had passed, and more than half the residents were gone. The rules were never merciful. So, hidden within the seemingly simple and harmless rule, there had to be a terrifying, deadly catch. Mason, what do you think? This rule feels off. I can't figure it out. My suggestion is, since the rule doesn't restrict our freedom at other times, let's go up to the rooftop now to look for clues, see if we can find anything. It's fine if we don't. We can come back and rest first, regain our energy and stamina to deal with the next rule. When it's 10 a.m., we'll head up early to get familiar with the terrain and observe the situation. I'm afraid this rule will have many variables, many uncontrollable factors. We must be extremely careful. So we went up to the rooftop together. The door was unlocked, but since no one had used it for a long time, the jamb was full of rust. I had to slam it a few times to get it open. The roof was empty, save for a simple water tank. The place was so clean that a thorough search only took us 2.5 minutes. Confirming nothing was out of the ordinary, we went back to our apartment to sleep. It wasn't until 10 a.m. that we managed to drag ourselves out of bed. We went upstairs again. This time, quite a few people had already gathered on the rooftop. In a strange and awkward atmosphere, the time slowly crept toward noon. Until that moment, we still didn't understand what the purpose of the rule was. The rooftops of all the buildings were crowded with people. I watched the numbers 1159 hang on my phone screen for a long time, until a sudden, terrified scream finally shattered the silence. "What is that?" I quickly looked in the direction of the sound. Sure enough, a black dot was visible in the distant sky. 2.5 seconds later, more black dots appeared behind it, flying in formation. The dots moved at incredible speed, swarming densely toward the residential complex. They were clearly the challenge the sixth rule had prepared for us. As they got closer, I could finally see the black dots clearly. They were enormous, grotesque black birds, their pupils glowing with red light. Don't tell me we're their prey. I'm afraid so. As expected, the flock of monstrous birds circled, occasionally diving down to attack the people below. Several residents were torn apart by sharp talons, reduced to a pool of blood in a matter of seconds. The sight made my heart pound and my legs tremble. I couldn't help but glance at the stairwell exit, but the threat of the rule also hung over our heads. We couldn't go downstairs before 12:10. The consequence of breaking the rule would likely be no better. Faced with the continuous assault of the birds, we could only run wildly, looking for cover. Unfortunately, the rooftop was far too exposed. Only the water tank offered any shelter. We quickly scrambled over to it. Still in shock, I clutched my chest, watching the grotesque birds devour people in the open space. In just 2.5 minutes, the number of people on the rooftop had been cut by more than half. This is insane. Did the rules decide the death toll of the past few days was too low and switched to berserk mode? The previous rules, while difficult, were mainly about wearing down the residents' spirits. As long as we worked together and stayed calm, the chance of survival wasn't small. I ran the data. I estimated about 30 to 50 people would survive to the end. Clearly, the rules didn't want to see that. But this is only the 6th day, and the rule is already this brutal. Who can survive the next 4 days? With the way things are going, I doubt anyone in the complex will even make it to the 7th rule. But don't be too desperate. I think since the rules explicitly state survival is possible, they wouldn't create an absolute dead end. If we pay close attention, we might find a way to break this. I was about to nod in agreement with his encouragement when I saw a monstrous bird shrieking as it flew toward us. Our hiding spot behind the water tank had been discovered, and its target seemed to be Mason, who was lost in thought. "Mason, look out!" By the time Mason reacted, the bird had already slammed its talons into his shoulders. He immediately screamed in agony, unable to move. The bird let out a piercing cry, summoning its nearby flock for a group attack. "We have to save him, or he's dead!" May grabbed the iron frame on the outside of the water tank and pulled with all her might. With a sharp crack, it came off like a long club. She raised the iron bar and swung it at the bird. The girl, who was usually so gentle, was surprisingly strong. The bird shrieked as the bar hit its head. I quickly ripped off another iron bar and, aiming for the bird's legs, swung with all my strength. With a loud thwack, it finally released Mason. But immediately after, the bird's full fury turned on me. It screamed and flew at me like the wind, knocking me to the ground with a flap of its wings. I felt my whole body go numb, unable to move. Seeing the flock of birds gathering above my head, my heart sank. It's over. Just then, Mason, who had been freed, had 2 gruesome, bloody gashes on his shoulders and clearly couldn't fend for himself. May was some distance away, swinging her iron bar to fend off 3 other birds that were surrounding her. The water tank was now occupied by these monsters, and there was nowhere else on the rooftop to hide. Everyone was in peril. No one could spare a thought for me. A sense of helplessness washed over my body. Was I just going to lie here and die? The monstrous birds continuously dove at the fleeing residents, pecking viciously before soaring back into the sky. The residents, who ran in panic, only ended up being torn to shreds. Only after they had completely collapsed on the ground did the birds stop targeting them. Looking at the pale sky, I thought I saw my own end. In despair, I closed my eyes, waiting for death. Suddenly, a thought flashed through my mind. The birds' feeding behavior, it seems to have a pattern. All around were dismembered corpses, but there were huge differences between them. Some had been picked clean, while others were relatively intact, without any fatal wounds. Why? I shook my head, trying to discard the baseless thought. I stared at the scattered bodies of the residents, replaying the moment each of them fell, and suddenly it hit me. These monstrous birds don't eat residents who are already down. Regardless of whether there's still flesh on them, they ignore them completely. My thoughts shifted, and suddenly I understood everything. Their vision is impaired. The birds were fast, but they couldn't perceive bodies that were lying still on the ground. "Get down! Flat on the ground!" I pressed my body against the ground, the wind whistling past my ears. I swallowed and shut my eyes tight, awaiting fate's judgment. I counted a full 2.5 minutes in my head, and not a single bird came for me. They circled above us, so close, but it was as if they had suddenly lost their targets, just flying in place. In that moment, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. I was alive. After we figured out the bird's pattern, the rooftop finally grew much quieter. All that was left was the ceaseless wind, the chaotic footsteps, and the dwindling screams. The remaining survivors all copied me, pressing themselves to the ground, not daring to move an inch. The birds grew confused, having lost their targets. It wasn't until the 10 minutes were up that they seemed to be driven away by some mysterious force, vanishing into thin air. We were finally able to stand up, exhausted and horrified. May looked around and sighed. 10 minutes ago, there were over 30 people here. Now, only 6 or 7 of us are getting up. Mason clutched his still aching shoulder and gave me a faint smile. Good thing you figured out the key to breaking this, or I'd be a pile of scraps by now. I gave a wry smile and nodded, then helped him toward the stairwell. Let's get you patched up and get some rest. This is only the 6th day. If I'm not mistaken, the coming rules will continue to thin the herd, and they'll get even more bizarre and dangerous. Passing through the dark hallway, after a long, grueling day, we welcomed the 7th day. The midnight bell rang right on schedule. Community Rule 7. Sometime today, you must go to the 18th floor of Building 4 and ride the elevator once. Violators will perish. Attention! After the 6th day of rules, the number of survivors in the community is 36. The 6th rule was, without a doubt, a horrific massacre. The vast residential complex was now like a dead city. You couldn't see a living soul anywhere. And the 7th day's rule, just as we predicted, was no less bizarre. It sounded extremely simple. Just ride the elevator once, with no time limit even. But after surviving the burst storm, who would dare underestimate this seemingly normal rule? God only knew what terrifying presence awaited inside that elevator. I took a deep breath. Mason, this rule has no time limit. When should we go? Don't worry about my condition. The less time-sensitive the rule, the more we need to go immediately. Why do you say that? Past experience has proven that even in the most dangerous rules, a sliver of hope for survival exists. The earlier we go, the more test subjects we can observe. That way, we can deduce where the path to survival in the elevator lies. And so, we once again left our apartment. Building 4 had 20 floors, and was the only building in our complex with an elevator. When we got to the first floor of Building 4, we tried to take the elevator up, but no matter how we pressed the button, the display remained stuck on the 18th floor. Clearly, the elevator had been tampered with by the rules. It could only be entered from the 18th floor. We had no choice but to take the stairs. Thankfully, after climbing 20,000 stairs before, this was nothing to us. After reaching the 18th floor, we didn't go straight to the elevator. Instead, we chose to hide in a nearby corner of the hallway, using the gap in the fire escape door to secretly watch the elevator entrance. About 2.5 minutes later, the first group of residents arrived at the elevator. A couple. Their faces were tense. They hovered in front of the door for a long time before finally pressing the button. The inside was extremely quiet, empty. Seeing this, they breathed a sigh of relief and finally stepped inside, holding each other as they quietly waited for the doors to close. We held our breath, watching their figures disappear. I half expected something even more terrifying than the birds to appear the moment the elevator closed. Mason and I nodded. We had the same feeling. However, after the doors shut, the floor display on the elevator suddenly started changing, flashing through numbers. The number changed from 18 to 11. Then, the elevator plummeted at an incredible speed. In less than a second, it had dropped from the 18th floor to the 11th. Faint screams and the sound of impact echoed from behind the elevator doors. When it returned, all that was left inside were 2 limp skeletons. Seeing this, I felt my pores were about to explode. My God! That way of killing is no different from an execution. Thank God we listened to Mason and came to observe first. If we had just blindly gone in, wouldn't we have been the test subjects? Mason and May were both covered in cold sweat, trembling. Still shaken, we waited another 2.5 minutes, and the second group of residents arrived. This time, it was an older man by himself. When he pressed the button, We were shocked to see that the couple's skeletons had vanished. The elevator seemed to have returned to its original state, and the man, just like the couple before him, stepped inside. This time, the number on the display changed to 4. The elevator plunged, and in less than 2.5 seconds, it had dropped to the 4th floor. Unsurprisingly, the man became the 3rd ghost in the elevator. Watching this, we were too stunned to speak. It wasn't until May slowly said, "So, this elevator randomly selects a floor each time it opens and then plummets there at high speed?" Mason nodded. "I'm afraid so." I thought for a moment and asked, "So, does that mean we have to randomly get a floor within a 3-story range to have a chance of survival? This rule is too much of a gamble on luck. For someone like me who can step in dog crap just by walking down the street, this is a death sentence. Going up 3 floors might be just as dangerous. After a plunge like that, going up is even more terrifying than going down. Then what do we do? Let's just keep observing for now, see if we can find any more clues." May and I nodded. Over the next half hour, we waited for the 3rd group of residents. First was a female student. She was extremely lucky, randomly getting the 17th floor. Though the speed was fast, it was more of a scare than a danger. She quickly returned, safe and sound. Then came a young man who got the 10th floor. The elevator plummeted, bringing back a pile of mush. Next, 3 men and 1 woman entered together, randomly getting the 3rd floor. After a rapid ascent, not a single one survived. In just over half an hour, we had witnessed 9 people enter the elevator one after another. The only one who came out alive was the female student. Those odds of survival were worse than winning the lottery. Faced with such a difficult situation, I could only keep calculating the probability of survival in my head, silently praying for a miracle. Just then, Mason's eyes suddenly lit up, and he pulled us out of the hallway. To the elevator now. May and I were a bit dazed and quickly asked, "What's wrong?" But Mason didn't explain right away, just anxiously hurried forward. "Get in first, talk later. Don't let anyone else get in before us." And just like that, he dragged us into the elevator in a daze. Watching the doors slowly close, we held our breath, our tension at its peak. Then, the number on the display began to flash. The judgment of the rule had begun. After 2.5 seconds, the number finally stopped. I stared nervously at the screen. It stopped at 16. Then, it began to descend. The incredible speed gave me a sense of weightlessness I'd never felt before. When we reached the 16th floor, there was undoubtedly a powerful impact. But thankfully, it was only a 2-story drop. The impact was painful, but not fatal. After returning to the 18th floor, I stepped out of the elevator, as if I'd been brought back from the dead, and couldn't help but ask Mason, "How did you know it would be a safe floor this time?" "The key to the elevator is this number, 7. That's right, 7. The floor numbers seem random, but they're actually decreasing by 7 each time. The first time, the couple's 11th floor was 7 floors down from the initial 18th floor, and if we consider each drop to the lowest floor as a loop, starting again from the 20th floor, then 7 floors down from 11 is the second man's 4th floor. 7 floors down from 4 is the third girl's 17th floor. 7 floors down from 17 is the young man's 10th floor. 7 floors down from 10 is the 3rd floor for that group of 4. That's why I was so sure this time the elevator would drop another 7 floors, which was the 16th floor we just experienced. My God, was such a simple pattern hidden behind the elevator rule. May and I hadn't noticed at all. That's why I rushed to pull you into the elevator. On the 7th day, there were only 36 survivors in total. If we missed this round, we might never have gotten a safer situation, just a 2-floor drop. Another narrow escape from death. We returned home. After more than 20 hours of peace, the bell for the 8th day finally rang. Community Rule 8. At 12 p.m. today, all residents please proceed to Building 4 on time. According to the list, clean the electrical room on your assigned floor. The time limit is 5 minutes. Violators will perish. Attention! After the 7th day of rules, the number of survivors in the community is 9. Not long after the rule appeared, the speaker announced a list. 1st floor, Li Guangqi. 2nd floor, Shen Mian. 3rd floor, Zhang Mingli. Next, 7th floor, Mi. 8th floor, Mei. 9th floor, Mason. After hearing the cleaning roster, Mason let out a long sigh. It seems this time we can't face the rule together. 1 person per floor, essentially forcing the cooperating residents to separate and fight on their own. All this way, whether it was May's decisiveness, my meticulous observation, or your analytical ability, these were all key factors in our survival. It's a pity. This time we're definitely being split up. Even though it was only 5 minutes, the atmosphere of having to face an unknown, difficult situation alone was somewhat debilitating. I had to say, the rules were truly masters of psychological games. Each challenge was heavier than the last. Well, we should still go take a look first. Since we have to clean the electrical rooms, we should at least see how dirty they are. But, as expected, the electrical rooms on each floor were spotlessly clean, let alone dirty. We had to return disappointed. Mason took out 3 walkie-talkies from his room and gave one to me and one to May, so we could talk directly during the task. Carrying cleaning supplies, and after thorough preparation, we each stood guard in front of our respective electrical room doors, waiting for noon to arrive. In the quiet hallway, only the hum of electricity made my tension rise to its peak, making me completely lose track of time. I've opened the electrical room door. Inside is unexpectedly. His words were cut off by a violent coughing fit. Mason, what's wrong? The walls are all blood, thick, congealed blood. The stench is overpowering. I'm wearing 3 masks, and I still can't stand it. Hearing Mason's description, I felt a shiver, and also a sense of worry. I didn't know what would be behind the door in front of me. I seem to have good luck. Inside here are just a few doodle-like marks. That's great. If you can solve it quickly, you might be able to help us. At the same time, I finally opened my electrical room door. The scene inside left me stunned. It was far from anything I had imagined. Vastly different, because there was only 1 person sitting inside. A thin woman in ragged clothes, leaning against the corner. Seeing someone enter, she looked up. Her distinct face was incredibly familiar. May. Seeing this, my mind exploded. The walkie-talkie I was clutching fell from my hand. Wasn't I supposed to be cleaning? Why was May inside? Who was on the other end of the walkie-talkie? What's wrong? What do you see on your end? My hands trembled, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Inside is... I hesitated, unable to form the words. A feeling of horror shot to the top of my head. I couldn't understand the rule's intention at all. What if the person in the electrical room was the real May? How could I possibly communicate that past her to Mason? Every horror movie I had ever seen flooded my brain, nearly frying it. Listen to me. No matter what, only by following the rules do we have a chance to survive. We only have 5 minutes. No matter what you see, no matter how shocking it is, you have to clean it up. Mason's words were like thunder in my ears, jolting me back to my senses. That's right, I only had 5 minutes. Thinking about these brain-twisting, bizarre logics was completely pointless. No matter what, adhering to the form of the rule was the primary factor for survival. So I took a step toward May. But she shot out into the hallway like a flash, running for her life. Damn it, she's too fast! In an instant, all that was left was her receding figure. I had no time for regret. I could only chase her frantically. I absolutely could not let her get to another floor. The task of cleaning the electrical room had a total time limit of 5 minutes. If she managed to slip to another floor and hide, my chances of success would shrink infinitely. Finding a slender girl in a vast 20-story building was easier said than done. Thinking of this, I grew even more anxious. My speed had reached a limit I never thought possible, but May had a head start and was always a good distance ahead of me. Plus, she wasn't carrying anything heavy. I was still holding a short shovel. At this rate, I could hardly get close to her, but if I threw the shovel away, how could I guarantee I could control her? A difficult choice was before me, the urgent situation nearly making my head explode. And fate, in the end, did not favor me. The hallway of Building 4 wasn't particularly long. May encountered almost no obstacles and quickly reached the stairwell. It's over. With so many residents dead in this complex, there were bound to be some who hadn't locked their doors. Once she slipped to another floor and into someone's apartment, there was no way I could find her within 5 minutes. I'm done for. Feeling as if I'd been sentenced to death, I lost the strength to chase anymore. Panting, I listened to the sound of her footsteps fading into the distance. To think that, after surviving 7 rules, I still couldn't make it to the end. I let out a long sigh, threw down the short shovel in my hand, and prepared to quietly wait for death. But just then, a wretched scream suddenly erupted from above, nearly echoing through the entire hallway. I quickly picked up the shovel and headed up the stairs. After climbing a full 5 floors, I found the source of the sound on the 12th floor. A young woman was lying face down in the hallway. It was the fake May who had just been running for her life, and the person with a foot on her back, holding a heavy fire axe, was panting heavily. He looked up and glanced at me, a sudden smile spreading across his ferocious face. I stared at his smile, stunned, and mumbled aloud. May? That's right. The one who had taken down the fake May was the real May. Your problem solved. No need to worry now. Mason, that guy's not reliable. All talk, not like me. I get things done. Oh God, who could understand how I felt? Seeing May, sleeves rolled up, standing there so bold and strong, tears welled up in my eyes. The most difficult problem was finally solved. After that, May and I went to the 7th floor. She quickly cleaned up the drawings and then immediately ran up to the 9th floor to help Mason. Using the last 2 minutes, the three of us worked together and finally managed to scrub away those incredibly stubborn bloodstains. We had narrowly survived to see the 9th day. The midnight bell ran right on schedule. Community Rule 9. All residents, please proceed to the 10th floor of Building 4 at 8 p.m. and take the elevator down to the first basement level. Violators will perish. Attention! After the 8th day of rules, the number of survivors in the community is 6. The elevator again. The damn elevator. Everyone was still terrified of that thing that would plummet at a moment's notice. An elevator appearing in one of these twisted rules could never be a good thing. But despite our fears, we steeled ourselves as usual, grabbed our gear, and headed for the destination. At the elevator entrance, we met the other 3 survivors in the complex. What surprised me most was that they were also in a group, and they regarded our arrival with deep suspicion. In the confined space, the 6 of us drew a clear line, each group occupying one half of the area. Mason covered his mouth and whispered to us carefully. This situation actually makes sense. That elevator trial didn't have many floors that would allow for survival. For 36 survivors to be whittled down to 9, there must have been groups working together. Plus, they've all survived many difficult trials. They must have their own strengths. The rules are cruel. We have to be even more careful from now on. Wary of them, May and I both nodded vigorously. Without realizing it, the air had become thick with a tense, confrontational smell. It wasn't until the clock struck 8 p.m. that the elevator doors suddenly opened. The 6 of us stepped inside together. The display automatically switched to B1, and then it began a slow descent. The atmosphere in the elevator was extremely oppressive. No one spoke. Everyone stared at the tightly closed elevator doors, waiting in silence. After 2.5 minutes, we finally arrived at the first basement level. Logically, this should have been the complex's parking garage. But now, it had transformed into a long, dark, and deep corridor. At the end of the corridor, a single flame flickered. We shone our flashlights and slowly walked forward. The walls on both sides of the corridor were covered in murals. We understood the content of the paintings. They depicted the history of this residential complex's reconstruction. Or, to be more precise, a history of blood and tears. 60 years ago, a catastrophic fire had occurred right where we were standing. Because the fire escapes had been illegally blocked by a greedy management company, the chaos of the disaster caused a fatal bottleneck. The entire complex turned into a furnace from hell on Earth. Buildings were completely destroyed, and agonizing screams echoed through the cold winter night. Countless lives were trapped in the heart of the fire, able to do nothing but wait for death in despair. The final death toll was 600, and behind the murals were dense, deep scratch marks, as if left by the vengeful spirits of every resident who had died. The few of us stared in horror. The death toll was 600, and the initial number of residents in the complex was 600. It seems to be a perfect match. It's a bit superstitious, but I guess the origin of this survival game is most likely the people who died in that fire. 600 people. According to ancient legends, they would have turned into resentful spirits, lingering for a long time without dissipating. Their tangled negative emotions created this bizarre situation. They hid themselves in the traces of history, and once the number of people in the complex reached the original 600, they would launch this kind of revenge on the living. We discussed as we continued forward until a white line appeared at our feet. Crossing the white line meant we had walked the entire length of the corridor and had arrived in a massive underground plaza. In the center of the plaza stood 3 tall wooden platforms. To our astonishment, we discovered that when someone stepped on the white line, it emitted a cold light. The more people who stepped on it, the brighter the light became. When all 6 of us had stepped on it, a line of blood-red text appeared on the plaza floor. When the platforms are full, the ritual will begin. Current number of arrivals: 03rd. Although we didn't know what the so-called ritual meant, thinking of the 3 platforms in the plaza, everyone reacted at the same time. The chance of survival was only for 3 people. This white line was the starting line. Unexpectedly, the 9th day's rule had turned into a direct race among the residents. 6 people, 3 platforms. Tonight, there would certainly be only 3 survivors. The 6 of us, almost simultaneously, burst forward with all our might. The underground plaza was vast, and the distance to the platforms was considerable. Our team's physical condition was nothing compared to the muscular builds of the other 3. Except for May, who could barely keep up with them, Mason and I were quickly left behind. Mason's shoulders hadn't fully recovered. He could only manage a half-hearted jog. I gritted my teeth, cursing fate's injustice. A race like this played completely to our opponent's strengths. Before long, one of them took the lead and climbed onto the first altar. Ha 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 ha! After he stood up, the altar emitted 2 beams of crimson light that wrapped around his sides, eventually forming something like a protective shield around him. No one else could get near it. At the same time, the text on the plaza floor changed. When the platforms are full, the ritual will begin. Current number of arrivals, 1/3. Seeing this, a suffocating feeling immediately rose in my throat. The worst-case scenario had happened. Once an altar was claimed, the spot was completely locked. In other words, the 3 of us could no longer pass this trial together. That wasn't even the worst news. Worse was that Mason and I were still a considerable distance from the altars, and near the remaining 2, there was only May and the other 2 opponents. The opponents, having been filtered through many trials, were extremely tough and ruthless. They didn't rush to activate their own altars, but instead worked together to corner May, intending to beat her back and secure the last 2 spots for themselves. Faced with the encirclement of 2 burly men, May had almost no strength to resist. The outcome was decided in moments. May was knocked to the ground, able to do nothing but watch as the 3 of them easily claimed all the altars. 3 arrivals. The text on the ground finally settled. The platforms are full. The ritual will begin. The 3 of us slumped to the ground, helpless, just looking at each other. After so much hardship, after surviving 8 calamities, we were still completely wiped out on the 9th day. Not even a single seed of hope was left. I let out a long sigh and quietly lay down on the ground. Suddenly, Mason's deep voice came from behind me. "Wait!" I turned my head to look. He was squinting at the 3 brightly glowing altars. Have you ever thought about what this so-called ritual actually is? It's probably just some ritual related to the dead. Then isn't that right? Think about it carefully. Rituals related to these things, what are they usually? May, in the distance, reacted immediately. Sal, salvation? That's right. Usually salvation or a curse. And I believe this is a salvation ritual. So what does that have to do with us? If we determine this is a salvation ritual, look at those 3 altars again. What do their shapes remind you of? I quickly took a closer look at the 3 altars. After 2.5 seconds, an answer suddenly emerged. Could it be a sacrificial altar? That's right. Their shape is identical to sacrificial altars I've seen. So, what we were just fighting for was actually the chance to be a sacrifice? I'm afraid so. As soon as he finished speaking, 3 fires suddenly erupted from within the 3 altars. It seemed this salvation ritual was to burn the 3 people in the altars to death. Heart-wrenching screams echoed from within the sealed altars. The 3 of them kept pounding against the light barrier but couldn't escape at all. Not only that, the flames on the altars grew larger and larger, starting to spread, as if wanting to engulf the entire underground plaza. Seeing this, May immediately got up and ran like crazy toward us. Run back! Seeing the situation, I also scrambled to my feet and ran toward the corridor we came from, back into the elevator, to escape the sea of fire that was about to form. The wind whistled in my ears. Watching the elevator doors close tightly again, I couldn't help but feel a little dazed. The rules were truly consistent and truly insidious. The thing it tempted the residents to fight for with their lives was death itself. Not long after we returned home, the midnight bell rang. Community Rule 10. The fire is spreading. The community is entering its final moments. Please leave the community after 1 a.m. Attention! After the 9th day of rules, the number of survivors in the community is 3. We can finally leave this place. Yeah, we've been through too much these 10 days. May, let's go. Let's leave this cursed place together.